Welcome, and thanks for checking out Living Loud. This is a place where you can check into what other people are getting out of astrology consultations with me. You can kind of see what it's like. Of course, consultations that are live are unpredictable, and consultations that are live and recorded with the intention of an audience to see them are not going to be exactly the same. So for anybody who's listening, just know that your consultation is going to be a totally unique experience, not only because your astrology is totally different, but just because of the nature of being on camera. So everybody's a little uncomfortable in the beginning, but a lot of times they forget that they're really being recorded and it becomes a little more authentic. So I'd love to invite you to stay to the end of the podcast just to get everything out of it, and leave any comments that you have for us in whatever comment section you find this in. So Sara, welcome to Living Loud. How are you today?
Great. Yourself?
I'm doing well. Thank you. I've got your whole sign chart on the screen. Everybody can see it if they're watching the YouTube version. If you're listening on Living Loud's podcast apps and you can't see the chart, it's okay. I will still leave a link to the video version so that way you can at least check it out. I don't plan to go back and forth with a lot of screens or make it really difficult to follow, and we'll be pretty vocal about what we're discussing, so it should still be pretty good even if you're not looking at the visual. But Sara is Leo rising, which is so funny because I pretty much only talk to Leo rising and Capricorn risings. They're very attracted to me for some reason. That seems to be the majority of people that I talk to. And then, interestingly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time referencing last week's episode because I don't think that's fair to you. And I would like to have a conversation with both of you. But I already noted on Facebook that this chart is very similar to the last chart that we did in the last episode. So I'm not gonna reference Tiffany too much because that's not fair to you, but still really interesting parallel that any of the listeners can go back and listen to the last episode to see kind of how things are kind of comparing and contrasting. So yeah, the most notable thing I think that I want to really get into first is the fact that you have 3 0-degree placements. That is pretty notable, especially because one of them is Mercury and it moves really fast. And your Mercury it's not maybe at full speed yet. I didn't really look into all the calculations. I don't really think that's that interesting for most people. But the fact that it's behind the sun and it's 17 degrees away tells me it's probably moving pretty fast at this point. It's done with its retrograde cycle where it was going back behind the sun and is now going direct. So it was going through that cycle. It has already met up with the sun, not in Cancer. That was probably a sign back, maybe even 2. I don't know where the Cazimi was, but now it's kind of coming back for an update with the sun. So I think you're very lucky that you were born the minute that you were, we'll say, just because Mercury has eked its way into the same sign as the sun. And when you have Mercury in the signs that is not the same as the sun, it can create an innate conflict in the chart, especially because you have the Leo rising. So if you were born slightly earlier, and I mean literally maybe even minutes, but if you were born hours earlier, you might have had a rising sign that was different than your sun sign, that was different than your Mercury sign, which creates a lot of conflict. Do you feel like your Mercury placement being at 0 degrees Cancer has kind of helped you feel at home with your identity?
No, actually, it's one of the things that I feel is my Achilles heel.
Okay, interesting. So maybe it's because you have the sun so close to the North Node, because North Node typically makes us feel uncomfortable. And so there's something uncomfortable about your identity, or it could be more to do with your 12th house, which can be a lot about isolation and not feeling connected. And to be blunt, the sun doesn't really give a shit about being connected to others. The sun is a leader. It doesn't need anyone else. It shines on its own, and everyone else gets its light from the sun. So that is interesting. Can you just expand a little bit more about why that feels like an Achilles heel? Does it relate to the North Node?
Well, I feel like I'm never truly heard or seen.
That sounds right, because of the 12th house. You're hidden. You feel hidden. Okay.
I had a friend who I've known about 12 years. She said, Sarah, I love you, but I don't think I know you.
Oh, wow. What a strange thing to hear from a close friend or a long-term friend.
Yeah, she says,
whether they were close or
anytime I
not.
feel like I'm getting close, she goes, it's always deviated.
That might have something to do with that opposition to Neptune in the fifth house. Was she someone who was, more of a playful friend, or was she more serious relationship? Not like, romantically, but like, was she more like work or maybe a family friend, or how did that work? Where'd she come from?
So she came from, which is funny, we connected through a cult we were both raised from.
Oh, a cult. Okay. So I knew you had told me that before. I should have looked into cults a little bit more because it's not something I'm super familiar with astrologically. Did you ever look into that? I know you're kind of what would you say? Are you not immediate, intermediate in your astrology studies? You call yourself a beginner? Where are you at in there?
Well, it depends. I feel like I'm all over the place.
That's a pretty common feeling for an intermediate student. Usually when you're a beginner, you don't realize how much you don't know, so you feel like you know more than you do.
And that's the thing, that it depends where in my life I'm at the moment. If I feel completely lost.
Sure. So I guess if I was going to make a wager on where that, I want to be sensitive, but I don't talk about cults very much. So I'm sorry if I, come across as blunt or anything. I'm a very blunt person, just so everybody knows. I've got Aries Mercury, so you'll have to deal with that. But
my husband's an Aries rising, and I've got an Aries son daughter. I'm good.
Okay, cool. So I think the most obvious placements that come up with that is going to be the Pluto trine the moon. That's very strong. It's one of the strongest placements in your chart because it's pretty close to the angle. It's very close in degree. I mean, they're less than 1 degree apart in strength. And then it also makes a loose connection to Venus, which Venus isn't necessarily related to cults, clearly, and she's not really related to even parents so much. But of course, our connection to our parents and how we were raised has an effect on our relationships to others, whether they're family or romantic or not. And so I think it's pretty strong there. And with Mars coming to join it, it's not close by any means. Mars is not close to your Pluto or your moon by degree, but it is coming away from Saturn. So boundaries, restrictions, walls, and things like that. And it's coming directly close to your IC, which is your safety and home. It's not in the house of home in your chart. It happens to be in the third house, which is more about neighborhoods. So that seems to be really relevant. So you, with this friend you were talking about, you have a definitive wall up, right?
Well, I left the cult first, which helped her leave. So you would imagine, to a certain degree, we have a deep connection.
Yeah. You were a leader to her then.
Yes, but it's fun. I find it funny because she's still confused on, like, you led me somewhere, but I still don't feel like I know you.
I wonder too. I mean, like I said, that Venus or the Mercury, opposite the Neptune, it's not necessarily a bad placement. It can be very dreamy and romantic and artistic. And I'm thinking especially here about visual arts, fine, maybe for sure, but more about words. with Mercury, and it doesn't have to be poetry, but the archetype of poetry, So
Yes.
how has that kind of come up and it doesn't have to be in that relationship. I understand that you were mostly just illustrating that even people who have known you a long time don't feel like they know you well. But as somebody who has kind of a hidden personality, how has that translated out into the rest of your life? Is it something that you like to keep private, or do you wish you were more open?
Well, between my Cancer sun that wants to connect and my Aquarius moon, I feel like it depends what time of the day it is. Do I want you to know me?
Yeah, and that's probably because Cancer is known to be one of the least, not stable. Stable's not the word I'm looking for, but the fact that it is ever changing. It's cardinal, it's seeking change. And then it being related to the moon, it's the fastest moving planet, obviously. And so there's an innate need for things to not stay the same in Cancer. And when you have something like the sun there, where it's like ever burning, it doesn't need anything else, it just needs itself, that's not necessarily a conducive energy. The sun wants to be in Leo. And I've said this a few other times in other contexts where I think the last time I was talking about it was about Saturn, but it works for every planet. Whenever the sun or any other planet is in the sign before its home sign, it kind of feels like it's on a long road trip and it's just really wants to get home. It doesn't want to be here anymore. It's so tired. Its legs are ready to stand up, and it wants to it would rather do a marathon than sit in the car another minute. And that's kind of where the sun is when it's in Cancer. And every sign has its benefits and its downfalls. So it's not, only in Cancer that it's not only Cancer placements who have that disappointing placement. I'm using air quotes for everybody who's only listening. But the sun would really prefer to just get this next 10 days over with and be home where it can relax and really shine. So I've sort of lost where I was going with that. But I think the main thing I'm trying to get at is it makes sense that you have, this desire for things to, maybe not even a desire, but there's this underlying feeling of change, and I'm not really the same. And like you said, what time of day is it and how am I feeling? And it's interesting because, everybody knows the moon doesn't care to be in Capricorn, but they don't talk that much about the moon being in Aquarius. And because it's Saturn's sign, it's still not the most hospitable place. And so it makes sense that you're having this push and pull between wanting to be in, a deep connection with, some of this water placements. Having Chiron in Taurus doesn't necessarily mean that you're looking for, depth of intimacy, but it does speak to a desire for security that it doesn't feel like you have or you deserve, and even though you intellectually know you deserve that, it's hard to feel it.
And it's grown even stronger since I moved closer to my moon line.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. Actually, to be honest, I'm not even sure where my moon line is. A lot of my placements go through like Europe and Asia, and I've never been over there, and it's not anything I plan to do anytime soon. So that's a really interesting thing. I did move 6 hours closer to my Venus line, which is made me look much prettier. So that's been nice.
Love that.
Yeah.
See, when I moved, I didn't realize I was doing that.
Yeah, please expand on that. I'm going to be quiet for a while. I would love for you to expand on living near your moon line with somebody who's got all these crazy connections to their moon. You have a lot of placements connected to that moon.
So I have been fortunate and unfortunate to I currently live on my moon line. And that has opened up my emotions more than I ever imagined. And before that, maybe 10 years before that. I've also lived on my Pluto line.
Oh, wow. Yikes.
Yeah. I really do not recommend anyone do that. I went through some of the hardest times of my life, and I didn't realize until after I moved away that it was me living in my Pluto line. And I actually moved away, stayed away for about a year and a half, moved back to my Pluto line, and just finished turning the stake that was driven through my heart. And then finally left for good.
Isn't that great to know that it's not just you and it's not just your choices and it's not just like you're not, I don't want to use the word blame because there's a place for that, you know, in our personal growth journey. But
it was very healing to know that there was reason, that there was logic behind the mayhem I had lived through.
yeah, if you want, let's kind of expand on that a little bit because that's a very unique perspective that even people who haven't lived your life experience can feel. I don't think that I've met anyone else who has described their childhood as being part of a cult. And so if you're interested or comfortable with it, I would love to talk a little bit more about how that has affected, especially through your chart. Obviously, we should focus on your chart. This is an astrology consultation. But I can see the connections if we're looking really at Pluto, because in case anybody is unaware, when you're looking at your astrocartography map, just because the internet says, oh, this is a great place for you, it might not be quite so accurate because if you're in your chart, your placement that it's referencing, let's say Venus, and it's like, oh, this is a great place for you to live. It's going to be so harmonious and romantic. But if you have Venus in Scorpio and it's connected to Pluto and it's in a square with Mars, do you understand what I'm saying? Everybody else listening?
It's a dumpster fire.
It could be, yeah. So I think you need to be aware, in case you weren't, anybody else, that if your placement in your chart is not in a good place, then that doesn't necessarily mean that the arbitrary description from any website saying this is a good place for you may not be the full picture. So since it's connected, Pluto especially, but also that Mars and Saturn aspect, the conjunction is very close. It's all kind of interplay with your moon and Venus. So, and those happen to be in your social houses. So you just for context for everyone else listening, when I asked Sara what she wanted to focus on today, she said something about her career. And we're going to talk about that, of course. But the most drama in your chart, which at your age, I would guess you've probably worked through a lot of it, come to some understandings and made peace with a lot of this. So it makes sense that you're not focused on that, but just for interest of the listeners, I think they would be interested a little bit in how this has made itself known in your social dynamics, because you got, just for everybody listening who's not seeing the chart, we've got Mars, Saturn, and Pluto all in the third house, which is trine Venus in the 11th and Moon in the 7th. So those are the three, social houses. So how has that come up, especially with your extended groups and with any partners that you've had, if you're comfortable sharing?
Absolutely. So it's a unique situation because most people have some type of roots to their past. And in order for me to leave the cult, I literally had to walk away from everything and anyone that I ever knew. So socially, I had to start all over again. And funny enough, walked away from the cult only to move to my Pluto line to be brought back into the cult?
To me, the word that's coming up here is almost like deliverance. And I should maybe look at the definition of that just to make sure. Actually, the reason it's coming up, this is comical. The reason it's coming up is because my husband played a Bubba Sparks song on YouTube last night called Deliverance. And so that word is fresh in my mind, so that's fair. But I'm thinking how it seems like, if I was in a position like that, and I haven't really been, certainly not to that degree of intensity, but my mom moved to Pennsylvania and I lived in South Dakota when I was 16. And so I didn't necessarily choose, I did the opposite, where maybe the right move would have been to move with her at 16, but I chose to stay with my social group. And I've actually had sort of a lot, like I was saying on our comment thread earlier, I was having some regret and like a cocktail of regret and concern that was the wrong move. And it would be easy, I would think, for you especially to have that experience that was it the right move to start over and be by myself? And with the moon being in your 7th house, I think the reason deliverance is coming up for me in this respect is because Venus would be not necessarily the most beneficial planet in your chart, but just because she is usually a soother, she brings a balm, she makes us feel a little more held and supported. And so having that in the 11th house is speaking to you being protected in a group setting, but only to the degree that you have earned that because of the connection to Mars, which says action. It says, I have to do something to get that deliverance. I have to do something. And you could say go somewhere because it's in the 3rd house of traveling, usually not too far, but, depending on the transits.
It's funny that you say that because that actually all ties in.
Mm-hmm.
In order for me to have actually left the cult for good, it was a Venus in Gemini and Sun who I married that brought me back into the cult to a point so deep that I had no other option than to run away and leave. And I traveled after that for about 7 years.
Oh my gosh, that's conveniently a Saturn square cycle because Saturn takes 7 years.
So I had traveled before that a little bit, but what ended up happening is I looked at my husband at the time and I said, if you want me to ever leave my closet, because at that point I had gotten so bad, I'd been in my closet for about 4 months. I said, you need to buy an RV and I'm going from my closet to the RV and we're leaving. And that's how I left.
That's how you left. Are you still with that partner?
No.
Okay. How did that?
That was another deliverance.
I was wondering that.
Oh, yeah.
When did that happen? When did you guys officially part ways?
The eclipse of 2017.
Ah, okay. Interesting. So the eclipse of 2017 would have been, I think, I should Google this to make sure.
August.
I think it would have been in Libra and Aquarius, right?
I believe so. So it happened, or it triggered. Was
it August 21st, or was it the later one?
Or 4 months prior.
Okay.
But he wouldn't allow me to. He wouldn't leave.
He wouldn't leave. Oh my gosh.
And he finally left a few weeks after that eclipse. Yep. He left September 30th.
Okay. Okay. So let's see. So it says solar eclipse was on Monday, August 21st in 2017. And then there should have been one slightly before that or slightly after. Just for anybody who wants to look into their own eclipses, Susan Miller Astrology Zone has a really great table of eclipses. So I'm just going to go to that and find the right date so we can see the timeline for that because it seems relevant.
Oh, yeah.
I'm Googling here, almost to the right date. Okay, 2006. Here we go. Okay, so yeah, it looks like August 7th was the lunar eclipse in Aquarius. So that would have been the full moon version, which is usually some kind of letting go. So maybe around that time you became more aware of what you really needed and wanted. And then on August 21st, there was the solar eclipse in Leo at 29 degrees. Wow. So that was just barely in the first house. So that's for classic first house, seventh house dynamics where you're starting to understand more. It doesn't have to be about a breakup. I don't want anybody to be afraid that if they're having eclipses on their first and seventh house axis that they're going to be broken up with or they're going to lose somebody that they care about. But it's more about the dynamics in that relationship. So you get to choose, is this right for me? Or how am I acting in relationship towards my partner or business partner or whatever? And so that's very classic archetypal expression of eclipses in the first and seventh house. So that makes total sense. I'm glad that it's over. I know it wasn't my life experience and it's not really my place to say that you did the right thing or wrong thing, but it must feel great. Like you said, a deliverance to feel like now you're on your own path and you can move forward for yourself instead of a partnership.
Oh, absolutely. And it's been so refreshing in the sense that it was very painful, but it's been very rewarding.
Yeah, and you know who speaks to pain is going to be Pluto and of course Chiron. Your Chiron is I forget this every damn time to put the aspects to Chiron. So if you're listening, of course you can't see it anyway, but if you're watching, you can't see a line between Chiron and the moon here, but it is pretty strong. It's only 3 degrees apart. Some astrologers think that's too wide for an asteroid, but I think Chiron is pretty tried and true by these times. I think people have come to the agreement that Chiron does have valuable information. So yeah, and this is maybe a good time to kind of move into your career and maybe how that's impacted you. But if you have anything to add about your social dynamics, of course, we can go all around. It doesn't matter.
Actually, that is such a good entrance because while I was in that relationship, it was a very controlling relationship. When I actually left that relationship, I am now a business owner.
Yeah.
Which is something that would have never happened because my ex was so controlling. I was never allowed to do anything.
Right.
That he wasn't involved in.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can't have your own things, of course.
Heck no. So it's been very rewarding. I've also had 2 beautiful children after that.
Mm-hmm.
And it did feel like a deliverance, though.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if I've made it clear enough that you can't be delivered from something that isn't absolutely awful and horrible. So you're not delivered from, going to the ice cream shop. So yeah, that's a pretty important thing for people to realize that this was most likely some of the hardest things that you'll deal with. And you may find that no matter where you go, you've got conflict in certain places, especially, do you have any siblings?
Yes, and I haven't had contact with them in about 12, 13 years.
Sure. Are they still involved with
Yes.
everything. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't personally like to look at charts that are not expressly given permission. I'm not given permission for, but it would be interesting just to see how that placement has manifested in your siblings' lives, just because you got it in the third house, but unless your siblings are near your age and unless they've got the Leo rising, it wouldn't be in the same place. So it would manifest in probably a completely different way. And so that's pretty interesting.
Yes. I have an Aquarius brother and I have a Pisces brother. And it is just best that we keep to ourselves.
Yeah. And I try not to give advice about stuff that I don't have, I'm not a psychologist. I mean, I want to give you advice based on your chart. It does seem like that's probably for the best. There's maybe a slippery slope there where you maybe are vilified, especially with Pluto being on the moon. I would say the moon really does have a lot to do with you as an individual, just because we change so much through a lifetime that the moon seems to be the most, I'm not saying that the sun is not an identity placement. Of course it is. That's who you are as a core person. But as your real personality, the moon is pretty strong, especially for females and especially for people born at night. You were born really early in the morning, so I don't know that that's necessarily relevant. But as a woman, I'm assuming that you identify as a woman. I'm sorry if you don't, but if that's the case, it's probably pretty strong, and it's probably smart, for you to stay to yourself and not be affected by that so much.
You'll find this funny that my very, very toxic ex-husband, not the same year, but him and my mother were born on the same day.
Oh, wow. Isn't that crazy? That's something that a lot of people, even outside of the spiritual communities and outside of the philosophical communities, people have noticed that trend, that we tend to connect with people who are, like I was saying earlier, there's something about our attachment styles that translates to our social relationships later. My husband looks just damn identical to my dad. It's so weird. They don't act anything alike. And I don't have a relationship with my dad. And some of the reasons I love my husband so much are because he's almost polar opposite. But he looks just like him. And I'm like, how did I do this? Damn it. But yeah, that's really interesting that you found somebody. Did they act pretty similarly, or because you got the moon in the seventh house? That's pretty classic not mom issues. I don't mean that, but like mom connected to spouse. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe they both touched my Venus.
Of course they do.
And yes, and they are just, I didn't realize how very alike they were until after, of course.
Yeah, of course.
So I tend to be a little shy with Geminis now.
Right? Everybody's got that sign that they're cautious around.
I love them. I can have an amazing time. I want a very long distance.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can see that with, having Venus there, there's an automatic attraction. It doesn't have to be, for me, Gemini is a lot of my family. My family has lots of Gemini in it. And so it's not anything. My husband, it happens to be a Gemini sun as well. Venus and Gemini too. So, I mean, there's some of that romantic stuff too. But yeah, it's having it in your 11th house looks like, friend at arm's length. That's a perfect description for that, because it's not going to be, super intimate. Gemini is not a super intimate sign. It's just not. It's an intellectual sign.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And having it involved in that grand trine, there's a grand trine between Venus, Moon, and then there's a couple ways it goes. There's one with Pluto if you go with a wide angle, and then there's one that's much stronger to the Saturn and Mars. And to me, I think to most people that would describe something that was, with Saturn especially and with Mars, there's a lot of ripeness for conflict there. And when Venus is involved, it can be, especially because you've got Mars and in Libra and conjoined with a very strong but very constructive Saturn, because you're born during the day. So Saturn is more constructive. And so, there's definitely ripe conflict available there, and you get to choose whether you want to partake in it. And I think the cool part is that Mercury being out of sign, so it's not in the proper sign to be trine to Saturn and Mars, but it's by degree a wide angle where it's having communications with some of those planets. And so since it has eked over into the Cancer sign, I guess, or house, however you want to look at it, it has a really interesting bridging effect where there is some conflict because Cancer and Libra are square, but there is some ease because it has by degree some aspects of the trine. So there's some bridging of some conflict there, and you can access it intellectually, but probably through being alone and not being in the middle of it. You need to retreat and go home, figure out where you stand on the matter, and then you can make constructive decisions with that.
That is exactly how, after having a rough 20s, in my 30s, I finally realized that I need a closet. And I utilize my closet anytime I need it.
Yeah. I mean, are you saying that like literally like you need a she shed, or more figuratively like you need people to leave you alone?
Oh, no, I need my closet, like an actual physical closet. I go in there.
Yeah, sure. Like kind of like a she shed. This is my space. Get away. Yeah.
Yes. And my kids, my husband know. If I'm in there, you don't knock.
Mm-hmm. You don't even need the sign.
You allow me to, yeah. You allow me to process whatever I need to process. Because if you come after me, I don't know what's coming out.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I think it's a good thing for everyone to have a space where they can retreat to. Yeah. And actually, speaking of retreating to, having Jupiter, it's annoying, I think, personally, when you're reading online and everybody's talking about how amazing Jupiter is and it's the lucky planet and it's doing this and it's doing that. And I think it's a little bit bullshit, because I'm not saying Jupiter is not a protector and it's not going to give you things ever. But if you, kind of like when I was saying, hypothetically, if you had Venus in Scorpio and she was square Saturn or whatever, and it was something that was uncomfortable, this is a pretty great description of when Jupiter can be hard and rough. So having Jupiter at 0 degrees, very strong, very, we'll say pure archetype, right? When it's at 0 degrees, it's usually very pure and very strong. Having it to be exactly trine to Mercury is, to me, describing exactly what you're saying. You need to have some protection for your mental space, especially because it's in the 12th house of being isolated and alone and needing that. And then being trine the Jupiter in the house of home, and being safe and secure. Plus you have your IC in a different sign. And so those are discordant, right? There's something discordant there where you maybe feel more at home. And this is maybe your lizard brain feeling more at home in the cult for a while than being at home in your own home by yourself, being alone and being almost like king of the mountain, standing here like, yeah, I guess I'm winning, but I'm alone. again, I'm alone unless I go back to the cult or unless I go back to my siblings or, whatever. And so I can see that discordant with especially a Mars ruled fourth house. I say this to a lot of people because, like I said, I coincidentally attract Leo rising and Capricorn rising. I'm Capricorn rising, so I can see that. But even my husband has Leo rising. And so there's a lot of that around. So I feel like I keep repeating this. So I'm sorry to anybody that's heard me say this a couple times, but having a Mars ruled fourth house is the fucking pits. It's so harsh. It's so frustrating. It feels like you have to grow up immediately. You don't have any room to be yourself. And it's so frustrating, especially I feel a lot worse for Libra, or I keep saying Libra. I feel a lot worse for Leo rising just because they are built to have that archetype of the performer, the person who's shining. And everything you read online says, oh, Leo rising, you're someone who's, showy and you have good self-esteem. And it's like, unfortunately, that's not really how it works. It doesn't, because that fourth house where we came from that describes especially our ancestral line, says it's harsh and it's conflict ridden and it's abrasive. So anyways, I'm rambling a lot, but I can see how that has led you to need to not only accept that you need that, but to advocate for yourself for it. That sounds like what you're doing.
Well, and that's the thing, that it took me 40 years to realize I needed to advocate for it.
Yeah. And I bet you,
it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it does, I'm sure. Actually, I just recommended it on our comment thread, but I was reading this book a little bit last night. I've read most of it, but it's You Don't Really Believe in Astrology, Do You? By Pam Gregory. And she has a whole chapter in here. It's kind of, if you like my content, whoever you are, then you will love this book because it's not going to teach you how to do astrology, but it's going to give you an understanding of how you will use it when you have learned it. And so it's very interesting. There is one chapter called something like, Do You Live Strategically? It's number 5. Chapter 5. Ooh. And that's a lot of what this is about. My favorite passage of that chapter is something along the lines of, here we go. The urges and desires of what you want come from your birth chart. It's all about your individuality emerging rather than needing to be invented. And I really resonated with that. And you said, in my 20s, I was having a hard time. And I've acknowledged that pretty much everybody's 20s are difficult. And a lot of that is because every single 2.5 years to 3 years, you're faced with a new challenge. And that's based on the Saturn cycle. I have a whole post if anybody needs to have a refresher on what the Saturn cycle breaks down into by just a couple years at a time. But it's this long trek of like your 20s is a long trek of understanding the context of all of your conflict and difficulty from a delay perspective. And as humans, almost regardless of your natal chart, humans are innately slightly impatient. We always want things right now. We always want to understand where we're going. We don't want to know. We want to have a map. And I think that's why astrology is so attractive to me, because I have Virgo in the 9th house. And so I really want to analyze the shit out of everything. But then it's like, what do I do with this information? And that's what your 20s is learning what's the context around all of my difficulty and frustration. And so anyway, I think, especially even if you didn't grow up with such a harsh childhood, I think that's still everyone's experience. But for you, 0 degrees Jupiter expanding your Mars ruled house, even in the Placidus chart, your Jupiter is still in the 4th house. So that's a very strong placement that the universe said, you're not getting out of this. You're going to learn this.
Well, and that's the thing, that I've always looked at Jupiter, and I think that's the one thing that's angered me in my chart.
How did I get so unlucky to have that? I get it.
Yeah,
I am in the 8th house, so I resonate with that.
I'm like, it's Jupiter. Come on. You're supposed to be cutting me a break.
I know. Yeah, I hear that. Definitely. I also wonder too with Uranus at the 0 degree. It's so close. You were so close, maybe not by the same degree of Mercury, but within a few weeks before that, Uranus was over the 1st degree. So it was past that 0 degree, but you waited just a little while so that way you could get the 0 degree Uranus. And I think that's notable, especially in the 5th house. So maybe there's something there about your children having an unexpected effect on you. And it's
for sure.
Yeah, and it's not making a lot of connections. Actually, it doesn't have any major aspects to it. I just so you know, I don't know if I mentioned this in the beginning. I did dial in your chart a little bit because it can be kind of overwhelming when you just let it do the default settings. So I made the orbs a little smaller. So you might be used to seeing some more lines to different places, but I just made it a little simpler. Just so we could focus on the strongest aspects. But yeah, it doesn't have any of the major aspects, no trines, squares, oppositions, things like that. And so the closest one I would say would be that Chiron placement. So because it's in the 10th house, I wonder if that almost has like your again, I guess the theme of this is sort of deliverance. Does that have anything to do with like if it's not your children, maybe it's your art or your hobbies or whatever it is, does that have anything to do with how you've channeled that in? And I'm cheating a little bit because I do know what your business is, but I mean, it's your business is fun, it's not something it's serious. I'm not saying your business is always fun for you, but you're in the business of fun, right? You have a media store, right?
Yes. So I own a used media store. We buy, sell, and trade movies, music, vinyl, CD, Funko Pops, video games. Hi. These are for mom. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Grab. There we go. Sorry, I got a delivery.
Speaking of. You're in the business of fun, which is really funny because you have only Uranus and Neptune in your 5th house. Not that the 5th house doesn't always have to do with business, but I just wanted to make, a point of it because you have Chiron there. And, if we're looking to solve our Chiron wounds, sometimes it is through fun and play.
It is. And this has opened in a huge door for fun and play for me because growing up in a cult, I never had access to any of this.
I've actually heard something kind of similar from people who were in the Jehovah's Witness religion because they don't usually do holidays and birthdays and whatnot.
Yeah, now I have open access to it all, and I get to share that with my community.
Isn't that great? And I think too, community is maybe what's the word? Not underutilized, but it's like it maybe flies under the radar for you because now that you have, I would imagine there is some kind of trauma responses to community and finding yourself in community. And it's interesting because like I was saying before with this deliverance theme, you have the Venus, she has a harder time being a pain in the ass than Jupiter does. Jupiter it's easier for Jupiter to be a pain in the ass because he expands things. And, the classic example of that is overexpansion to the degree of like cancer, right? If you have too fast a growth in your body, you'll have a cancer cell, right? So that's a pretty easy archetype to understand how quickly it can become a pain in the ass. So that's why I always get annoyed when people say that Jupiter is like so great or whatever. But Venus has a harder time being a pain in the ass. She usually, because she moves so quickly, it's usually not a huge, horrible thing. There can be difficulties, obviously. Like I said earlier, she's in a place she doesn't like or having communications with planets that she doesn't like. Of course, it can be difficult. But
and I think 2020 really re-triggered that, because when our country was going through all of these issues, it made me feel like, why did I work so hard to leave a cult to now be stuck in the middle of the same thing again?
Interesting. Well, and we already talked a little bit off camera about how your experience through 2020 was with Saturn being in Aquarius of the 7th house, which, I'm sure had some impacts on your one-on-one relationships, especially because it had to do with your moon. But I think it's an again, whatever that word I'm trying to use is an explored experience of having Saturn trine something. Everybody says, oh, trines are so great, they're easy flowing, but they aren't always, because sometimes they activate things that are difficult. Like, you have a grand trine in your chart. People would be like, oh my God, you're so lucky you have a grand trine. No, I was literally in a cult. Are you kidding?
And that's the thing with my chart, that I hate showing it to people, because the first thing is like, oh my gosh, look at those trines.
Yeah, and all it does is make it like the river of shit flow faster. I totally get that. Yeah.
Yes. And it's like, I can never have good times without bad times.
Wow. And I know that sucks to say that. And I bet people who haven't had maybe so many, I don't want to say bad life experiences, because again, it was meant to teach you something. I don't really love that, oh, everything happens for a reason phrase, but it's really hard to live life without having some of that mentality, I think.
I go with the, I believe our life is a soul contract.
Okay, good. Yeah, me too, personally.
And my soul contract was signed through Mercury retrograde.
Yeah, right.
I forgot to read the fine print. I saw the trines and went, sure, sign me up.
Right? One of my favorite memes is I don't remember what the picture was, but it was basically like, when I was in the astral plane getting ready to come to Earth, I thought I was such a badass and I could handle all this, but now I changed my mind.
That's it. That is me.
I bet. Yeah. I've got some harsh stuff in my chart too. I totally resonate with that, where it's like every time I read about a grand cross online, they're always like, but it's so constructive. Later in life, you're going to be so strong and you're going to have such great results. And I'm like, yeah, but it's so hard right now.
Only if you survive.
No kidding. Exactly. Gosh, that's hilarious. Okay, so yeah, I think what I'm really trying to dig into here is kind of like I was saying, sometimes when we heal our Chiron rune, people spend a lot of time on how we can heal it by teaching others, because in the archetype, Chiron was a teacher. And I think sometimes people will take that and run with it a little too far without thinking about when and where that came from. Like, yeah, I know that you can't really look into Chiron without having, some kind of reflective process to figure out how it's resonating in your life. But I think the thing is, most people get their Chiron wound when they're a child. And I think they skip over that part where they're like, oh, I guess I have to go and help people with this. But you can't help them with it until you fully understand it. And you can't understand it fully until you've gone through some processes of healing it. And then you can't heal it without, unfortunately, I hate to say this because it's very trendy right now, but you can't do it without the acknowledgement of the inner child and the inner child's needs. So for someone like me, I was born in 91, so I had the Chiron trine the Pluto, which sucks. Nobody wants that. Yes. That's rough. That's going to be kind of like a double dip of whatever trauma you have. And so lucky for me, I get two, almost like I get two of those. And so it's funny because without taking an hour to tell my whole story, I was sexually abused. And it's funny because, and not funny, haha, obviously, but funny, weird, that is not actually my wound. Like, I don't know. I'm a pretty sensual person, fine. And I did have a little bit, you know, as I was growing up with my first boyfriends, I did have some hesitancy around intimacy, but that is not where it comes from. It comes from abandonment from my real dad not being there, which is really interesting because it would be really easy for me to look at my chart and say, oh, it's in the 7th house, obviously, and I was sexually abused, so it must be that, and then just kind of move on with my life. But that's not really it. I mean, the person who abused me is a loser. He's in jail, and it's not because of what he did to me, but it doesn't impact me now. So it can't be that, because I kind of feel like I have healed that. But unfortunately, you don't heal Chiron. It doesn't really close. There's something that's always going to be there. So how does that come up? Because it's coming up in your public reputation. So how does that interact with your life?
I'm a pretty stubborn person. And unless I logically understand something, I don't mind going against the grain.
Sure. I was reading about the kite aspect. You might want to read. There's a blog from Astrology King about the kite aspect. You should read that later. I can send you the link if you'd like. If anybody has a kite in their chart, check out that, because he mentions specifically needing to know why. And I think because your kite is a lot to do with air, it's all air. And then the pinnacle of the kite is Venus in the 11th. It makes sense that you're not afraid to go against the grain. You've grown up against the grain. What's the difference now?
Well, that's the thing. I've gotten to a point in life where I'm too old that I do not mind being the only one standing.
Interesting. Okay.
And that is, it can be problematic when you live. So I'm not religious, and I live in the Midwest.
Yeah. More south of the Midwest, too. You live in the more south part of the Midwest.
I live in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And it is, when I first got here, it was very hard. Everyone here is really religious.
Yeah, and they find a lot of their social connections there.
Yes, I spent the first 2 years in isolation, not just because of COVID.
Right.
But it was, there's nothing that religion doesn't touch here. I remember when we first opened our store, we would get phone calls going, do you sell Bibles? And it's like, yeah, we sell Bibles, but I also have an erotic section.
Right, yeah. Yeah, like, don't pigeonhole me. I don't need to be pigeonholed.
You're going to find it all.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly. My business doesn't need to be pigeonholed, but that's what the energy of some, especially in smaller towns. I don't know how big yours is, but I grew up in South Dakota. So yeah, very, pretty rural. And it's like that here too. You can't go, 3 blocks without seeing another church. You got 3 churches and three bars in a town of 2,000, I mean, that's what it is here. Yeah.
That's really what it is. And I live so it's Broken Arrow, but it's tied into Tulsa, which is the mothership of megachurches.
Oh, really?
So we have about 5, I think, megachurches. So, but I've noticed that the more that I've been okay with myself and not touching the religion, but still being nice, I've been able to connect with people and kind of bridge that religious gap.
Sure. Was your, I think it seems like they usually are, but was your experience growing up about religion? Was that kind of the theme of your cult, or Not really.
Yes. Well, I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness.
Oh, okay. I brought that up earlier. That's so weird.
Yeah, I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And my mom was also raised as a Catholic, so she brought those Catholic tendencies and attached them to the Jehovah's Witness cult.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So she was really strict.
Sure.
And it had a huge effect. I mean, the cult was the core of my youth.
Well, and there's no way for that to be separated from your experience, but how did that have to do with, because if we think of Taurus archetypes and themes, it's usually about comfort and about feeling safe, and feeling, it doesn't have to be about feeling taken care of, but usually a Taurus will have pretty high expectations for their physical environment to take care of them. And if there isn't an aspect of that, then they're uncomfortable permanently.
So what happened was when I was about to turn 4, I was 14. I was 14 by then. I was kicked out. I was excommunicated.
Saturn in the 9th.
Yes.
Most likely, I would guess, if you were 14.
And that flipped my entire life upside down.
Wow. I wonder, do you know the date or not really?
I probably could go back and research it.
I wonder if it would be pretty close to Saturn in, it would probably be around Saturn in Aries, and it might be Saturn connecting with the MC, which would be your public reputation. And if Saturn is I think it's funny because Saturn is objectively difficult. It's not an easy planet. It never will be. It's about hard work and about being responsible. And it's interesting if that was the case, because right now you've got Chiron that is transiting directly conjunct your MC. And so you're finding who you are out in public and who you are, especially in your professional community. And so you're healing that wound, which was started when Saturn crossed over, most likely in that area back when you were 14.
So it was about March of 98.
All right, let's see.
Or the beginnings of 98.
Sure.
Maybe the ends of 97, right around there.
So,
but you'll find this interesting.
So March 1st of 1998, Saturn was at 18 degrees of Aries, and your MC is at 19 degrees of Aries. That's insane.
That checks out.
Yeah, it checks out. That's crazy. So, okay.
Yeah, it was done really harshly too.
Of course it was.
Oh, it was, I had grew up around all these people, and they usually, whenever they excommunicate you, it's usually done really quickly. They get up and they're like, so-and-so is no longer part of, Jehovah's Witnesses. When they did mine, they turned it into a 15-minute talk.
Oh, to make an example of you.
With Bible verses of what I had done. And for these reasons, we've decided to kick her out. So yeah, it was real fun.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, that makes sense because let's see. I happen to have it up, obviously. So let's see. Mars was in Pisces at the very beginning and then moved into Aries. So if it was more around like end of March, then they're teaming up, Mars and Saturn, which they were doing when you were born. So even if it wasn't, even if it wasn't and it was a little bit earlier, that would still be Saturn on the MC and Mars in the 8th house, which 8th house, I think a lot of people over what's the word, where you put too much emphasis maybe on something. I think that sometimes people put too much emphasis on the 8th house being about finances and other people's resources. And I talk about it a lot too. Don't get me wrong. I'm part of that. I don't want to call it a problem because it is accurate, but I don't think that people talk enough about how that is. I don't think they realize that your fear and your trauma is a resource. And it comes from other people. You're never traumatized by yourself. You're never traumatized by what you do. If you are traumatized by what you do, it's because of someone else's reaction or response to it. And so I think people are underestimating, when they say, oh, it's about the occult. Okay, fine. But mostly in the way that you, again, are using other people's resources for that spell or whatever it is that you're doing that's occult. And so, yes, fear and trauma is a resource, and that's why it's associated with the 8th house. And there's, I think it's hard to describe what the 8th house does just because it is so broad. I mean, sex, finances, inheritance, death, fear, trauma. How do you put all those things together unless you consider it from the aspect of it being an emotional fueling ground?
Yes, absolutely.
So while you were having that happen, the 9th house is all about your philosophy of life. And whatever you did in order to get kicked out, you probably knew the consequences. And subconsciously, I think personally, because it would be sextile to your moon, which isn't normally related to subconscious in the technical terms of astrology, but it's very related to the subconscious in the tarot. So there must be some kind of archetype there about subconscious, subconscious motivation.
Oh, it totally was.
Yeah.
And I also, so what ended up happening, and you'll find this interesting too. I think Princess Diana has an Aquarius moon.
Could be. I'll Google that if you'd like.
And I ended up losing my virginity the day she died.
Oh, really?
Which is the reason why I got kicked out of the cult.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I guess that would probably lend itself to Mars in the 8th house since it's about, sex as well.
Yep. And so that's the reason why I know when all that happened. Because I always Google, when did she die?
Yeah, actually, her moon is only 2 degrees away from yours as long as the reliability is good. And they've given it an A rating on the Rodden rating. So it could only be one better.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty reliable. So as long as it's not too far off, you guys have basically the same moon.
And
what a real, what's the word where it's like I don't want to call it a coincidence, but to have something archetypally, she literally died due to the public, and then you had a metaphorical death with your public. And at 14, that's pretty...
it was so traumatic.
Yeah.
It was, for what I went through as a 14-year-old, I wish I could scoop her up and hug her.
Yeah, no kidding.
Horrific.
How did your Saturn square go? That would be around the time you were 21. 20 to 22?
So you're asking some loaded questions.
Well, they're connected, right?
So I ended up marrying the guy that I lost my virginity to when I got kicked out of the cult, and we ended up having children.
Okay.
And I ended up finally leaving him at 21.
Oh, wow. You lived a whole lifetime before you were even 21.
And I was saved, quotation marks in the air.
Yeah.
By a man who was 22 and a half years older than me.
Okay.
Saturn,
that's a Saturn theme for sure.
He was an entire lifetime.
Oh, yeah. Were you guys together 3 years or 7 years, or was that related?
15.
Okay, so that's another Saturn number. That's pretty close. That's a Saturn opposition time frame.
Yep. And that's who brought me back in. He helped me escape the cold, but he brought me back.
Sure. How did that happen? Like, because the reason I'm asking is because when did you meet when you were 21, or did you get married when you were 21? You got divorced when you were 21.
I met him I divorced when I was 20.
Right.
Met him at 20, and I believe we got married when I was 21.
Sure. So there's North Node activity there, which is important because you were born not too long. Let's see. If the nodes are there and you were born with the sun on the node, then not very long before that was an eclipse, right? It should be.
Yes, my half brother is 2 weeks older than me, and his chart is just.
So he probably has the solar eclipse part where the moon is by the sun, but you were born slightly after the lunar eclipse that would have been in Capricorn. I think, anyways, that's how it should work, and I think as far as that goes. But it makes sense that there was something, I think people overuse the word fate, but it's hard not to use it when the eclipses are involved and when the nodes are involved. And so around that time, you would have had Saturn involved with that probably too. Interesting. I don't know what I was doing because this was what year?
Oh, let's see. About 2002? No.
Okay, yeah, so I was still around. I was about 14 then. So that makes sense because that would have been pretty close to coming up in my opposition. So yeah, that makes sense. It's helpful for me to figure out what's going on in the timeline when I know what's going on with my chart too. I'm sure most people are like that. It's helpful.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So then I guess I just noticed in the Placidus chart, which I don't normally use that much, but I think is important when you're looking at Chiron because it comes from the childhood normally. That's in the 11th house. So, I mean, could the archetype be stronger? Like, I don't feel like I really need to beat this dead horse, but again, maybe it's not so visible in your life right now with your public reputation because it is a lot more to do with your social connections, especially outside of your family.
Yes, now that you point that out, that is a big aha moment because that is really where my life pivoted and changed. And I looked at community completely different.
Sure. I think in this digital age, we have a complicated relationship with community. And a lot of people will call the 11th house essentially, the social media house. And I'm not discounting that. I'm not saying it's not. But if you had to describe that in 1980, what would you have called it? You know what I mean? So I think if we're looking at it from a more long-lasting point of view, I like to describe it as the concept of a congregation, and not in a church fashion, but just with the idea of how a congregation functions. So a congregation is at its core a group of people whose purpose when they get together is to do one thing, and that in most people's minds is worship. But that's not really what a congregation does. The individuals in a congregation might be worshiping when they're at church, but if the congregation as a whole comes together, what are they doing? They're supporting the congregation individuals. And so if you extrapolate that out into regular life and not just to do with the church, it's anybody who supports you in a more public fashion. And that's always the case with the signs that are, or the houses that are on the either side of any of the angles. So for the public reputation, 10th house, then that would be the 11th house is supporting the 10th house. So it's not so much that the 11th house supports you as, an employee or as even like in a financial way. It's more of a support for your public reputation. And in a church, that's, your public reputation in a church is, not always relevant to the rest of your life. For some people it is. And for someone with your chart, that can be the case because you have your MC in the 9th house of the whole sign chart. And that's easier to see in this view where you've got the MC in the 9th house. And so someone like you, it's even more pronounced, the philosophy aspect of your life. And so for you, maybe that is resonant where, the quote unquote congregation, separate even from religion, is, has to do with how you do feel received as a professional, so I can imagine getting those phone calls from people asking, do you sell Bibles, which is code for do you fit into our society? They don't give a shit if you sell Bibles or not. That's not why they called, so. Yep. Anyways, I think that I don't know necessarily where I was going with some of that, but I think it is a healing process. You going through having Chiron and the eclipse. I have right now the transits turned on for this eclipse. So the eclipse is happening right in that very philosophical area of your life, but it is not disconnected from your business life, whether that's at your work or not, and that's just more socially or whatever. Something there is going through a healing process. So since you brought up your career, I want to just specifically, because we're getting to be quite long and I don't want to take up your whole day. So I just want to talk about a couple things that I think transit wise are pretty notable, which is obviously the eclipse is happening almost directly on your MC. It is so close that you could literally lick it. Like if you were standing next to it, you don't have to throw a ball to it. You can literally on that. Yeah. So I think that you'll probably get some news, and it might not be something that seems very prominent until maybe 6 months down the line when we're finishing this in March of a year from now, when we're finishing this in March of next year. So there might be something that doesn't seem that, conspicuous, but it might be, because eclipses can be really unpredictable, but it should have a healing property. And obviously everyone is saying that because Chiron is involved, but this eclipse for everyone, not even you specifically, is about you, whoever you are, because Aries is always about you and it's irrelevant to someone else. And in your chart, I think it's more interesting that it's happening opposite to Saturn and Mars. So I feel I'm not necessarily advanced enough to make strong predictions, but I can look at the archetypes and say, this is going to have to do with boundaries, conflict, your public reputation. It doesn't necessarily have to do anything with the store because it doesn't have anything to do with your Mercury, which is your 2nd house ruler, or with Saturn, which is your 6th house ruler. So I don't think that it's necessarily going to be about your work as much as it's going to be about your philosophy of life and how you function going forward. I would imagine that in March of next year, you'll see that this was some kind of turning point because it is happening pretty close to square your own nodes. So there's going to be something here, probably will impact how you function in your daily life, but only because it's interacting widely with your South node, which is in the 6th house. And that's your day-to-day activities.
We're opening more hours. My husband's quitting his job and he's joining me at the store.
Oh, so it's going well then.
Yes, which is, and here's the other thing. I spoke to a customer the other day, and I told her, I said, I'm trying to find ways to get my own self to fit into the community.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I love your energy. Please don't do that.
Oh,
she goes, give us more of you.
What a message.
And so it's rattling in my brain ever since she said that about 3 days ago.
So what happened with did anything, I guess I should say, happen with the Libra eclipse that was just on the 25th of March?
I'm trying to think. We always have crazy things happening. But I can't usually pinpoint. It was pretty calm.
Sure. And that can be the case for some people, especially because now it's possible that something may have happened if something that may have happened in the past would have happened then you would have been knocked off your ass.
No, so it did. I had an interaction online.
Okay.
That caused a little bit more of a stir than I cared to in a local food group.
Okay. That's a neighborhood. Okay, that's possible. Yep. Yeah, and it seems like that's a small thing, but because it is interacting with your sun, and your sun is square to your Saturn and your Mars, there's something there about pushback with leadership. And I don't know, maybe if that was a theme that could be, have anything to do with that interaction. And it could be something that comes up with this next one because, Aries is a leader. Aries is interesting because it's a leader in the way that it doesn't really ask for permission. It goes and does whatever it wants, but it's also the soldier archetype. So when Aries is given direction, it will also follow that as long as it makes sense. And so usually a general is somebody who's very strategic, and he's not going to give his soldiers something that isn't strategically making any sense, because the general is Scorpio. They're the ones giving the directions, and then Aries is the soldier who carries it out. And so there's something that maybe there with leadership. And so I hate to be like, oh, so vague, but when it's in the 9th house, it could have to do with you getting a download from maybe like a message, like this woman, right as soon as Mercury is going retrograde, when you're trying to fit into to society and to a culture or a neighborhood or something, you're getting a message. Hey, just wait a minute. This is a message for you to remember where you were, and you don't need to go back there. And so maybe it's something to do with that. I don't see, let's see, it happens at 19 degrees. It is connecting with your moon. It's connecting with your Venus through a sextile, but it's pretty quiet. Venus is, possibly going to have some soothing aspect there. I wouldn't think that would be a negative. It should be maybe, like you said, with this message giving you, hey, stand your ground. Don't be afraid. Don't try to fit in, because when you try to fit in, you just get lost.
Yes. And I also think my husband is getting ready to leave his work.
Mm-hmm.
And that will definitely affect our relationship.
It will. But it could be in the better, because
yes, absolutely.
There's a pendulum swing, right? Especially for partners, where if you have a relationship where you guys are kind of ships passing in the night. I was just talking about this with someone else, because my husband and I had that for about 5 years, where he was working 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And then he had like a crazy schedule. So it was like 2 on, 2 off, 3 on, 2 off, 2 on, 3 on, or however it worked. And so it was hard, it was hard for us to have a real relationship. And I didn't realize necessarily how much it was impacting us until I didn't have that experience anymore, and we did see more of each other. So it could be that you guys will work really well together, and that will be beneficial.
So right now, he's working 50 to 60 hours at his job, then helping at the store.
Sure. And
we're raising 2 children under 5.
Yeah. And there's no room for intimacy there.
we don't have, I mean, we haven't been on a date in 3-4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe
we
that's
haven't been alone because we also don't have any support with our kids. So we don't have babies. We don't have the grandma or the aunt.
Right. And how do you trust a stranger with your upbringing?
So, yeah, exactly. So right now in August, our last baby will head to school. And he's going to quit his job and we'll be around each other more.
Mm-hmm. That's probably exactly what it's about, because with having Mars and Saturn and Pluto being in your Libra house is not necessarily irrelevant. Of course it's relevant, but even for what I'm about to say, even irrelevant to your chart, that this is a dynamic between the self and the partner. And like I was saying, the self and how you're acting as a partner, or how your partner's acting towards you, or the context surrounding a relationship. Like I said, it doesn't have to mean like, oh, we're breaking up or we're spending more time together necessarily. It just means, how are we interacting? And that's getting the update that is desperately needed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So personally, I don't know. It doesn't, let's see. It is opposed to Mars, which can be uncomfortable, and it's probably, like in the past, those interactions between transiting signs in the planets in the 9th house opposite Mars has come to be uncomfortable. Like you were saying, with Saturn being there or with Mars coming through, you were forced to stand on your own. You didn't get the choice.
Oh, yeah.
So that might be the case. And it might be uncomfortable again, but I don't personally, and I'm unfortunately an optimist at heart, and so it can be easy for me to just look at it and be like those blogs that are like, Jupiter's so great, I can fall into that myself just as a person. And so I'm not saying that, the other thing is that you have Jupiter and Uranus in your 10th house, which has been giving you unpredictable vibes anyway. I'm experiencing the most we're experiencing the most unpredictable month that we've seen in a really long time, because of the Uranus being in conjunction with Jupiter, and then having the eclipses in those two signs. So those two are funneling unpredictability. So it's hard for me to say, it's going to be so
washing machine.
Exactly. That's a really good metaphor. Yeah. So, and having Chiron there, I think almost every astrologer that I've listened to has talked about how this is going to be an unpredictable blessing. And I'm cautious about using that phrase because everybody's chart is different. It's, to me, Chiron, after you, I don't want to say earn, because nobody earns their Chiron wound, but whenever you receive it, after that, it becomes completely about healing it. It's not necessarily that it's painless, and there is going to be some like, ooh, ouch, that hurt, that tinge of, ooh, ouch, I don't like that. So there is going to be that, but it's just uncomfort. It's not actual new trauma. It's reactivation of old trauma in order to heal it up, right? I think Rumi is the one that has a quote, it's where the light enters you. A wound is where light enters you. And so having Jupiter and Uranus in your 10th house is in and of itself, even separate from Chiron, a pretty positive thing. Because to me, that says, Jupiter, I know, can be a pain in the ass, but it's usually going to just amplify whatever is going on there. Can Uranus represent things like house fires or accidents or, I don't know, insert chaotic, uncomfortable thing here? Yeah. Yes, it can. But I think because it's in Taurus, which is ruled by Venus, it's going to be a little more comfortable. Generally, that's a more comfortable thing. And if you look to where Venus is in your chart, it's in your relationships house again. So I think it's going to be better. I think it's going to be more of a healing thing. So you'll look back at this and just be like, while there wasn't necessarily an exact event that I can pinpoint, that is when I started to feel like, what do I have to lose? Someone in your position, it seems like, doesn't have that much to lose outside of, individuals specific individuals, your actual children, your actual partner. Everyone has something to lose. I'm not saying that no one has anything to lose. Just go wild, go do whatever you want. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying, especially with your not super close relationships, what do you have to lose? Nothing.
No, and I think that has been a lesson because I've allowed myself lately to get closer to people where it's definitely not a door that was even reachable to knock on.
Sure. You've reminded me of something I see in a lot of astrology groups, especially on Facebook, where people can just comment easily and make their, like, ask questions like easy breezy. And one of the things I see is, how do I, essentially what they're asking usually is, how do I mitigate this placement, whatever placement it is? How do I function having known this? And I have to hold back. And although I've decided lately I'm not going to hold back anymore because I'm just bored. I'm bored of social media. So I'm gonna stir the pot a little bit more. But I just so desperately want to comment on those. You literally just make the choice to.
Yeah.
There's
and
nothing
I think
else.
most people just have to get to that point. It's like, how far do you have to fall to realize this is just what you have to do and there's no way around it?
No, there isn't. And your astrology chart will show you maybe what is the most difficult. Like, for example, wherever Saturn is, wherever Chiron is, wherever Pluto is, wherever Mars is, that's going to show you, and maybe the North Node is very difficult for some people. That's going to show you where the difficulty is, which is going to allow you to see which choices make the most impact. Which choices are the ones that should bring up a flag in my mind? Which one, not a red flag, but, like, I'm thinking of like a mailbox that has a message for you. Whenever you come across that, then the flag has to go up, and unfortunately you have to train your brain to raise the flag. So that's a process, but it comes after that. Once you know, if you are making a comment in a group or even inside your own brain that is saying, how do I mitigate this? How do I act not without caring about it, but without being stopped by it? You literally just make the choice and you just do it. You have to act through fear. Having fear is a human experience, but acting through the fear is what courage is. And anyways, I think the most exciting life, the most fulfilled life is never going to be easy. It's never going to be something that is innately it's not your innate talents that you're mostly fulfilled by.
No, and I think that I was talking to my husband about this the other day. I said, there's no way I could be right now where I'm at without the experiences I went through, no matter how hard they were.
Exactly. It's just a choice. It would be easier for you to just go to a job and there's difficulties around that too. And I'm not saying that entrepreneurship is the magic bullet for anybody, because it's so hard.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
But to be just in line with our conversation and what we've been talking about, I think that the silver bullet that people are seeking is literally just choice and action. That's all it is. And if you want to make the choice and sit in the action of living with things being hard and you avoiding them, then you're going to go backwards, actually. And you're going to end up, I've seen that, it's cliche, but I've seen that picture where it's like a guy climbing a mountain and it's like hard choices, easy life, or easy choices, hard life. It's real. That's a real thing, and you can make the choice to run away from everything that's difficult and end up being, for some people that leads to literally prison, literally drug addiction, literally death, and so I'm not trying to sugarcoat it and say, oh, you just got to make good choices. No, you have to know, but then you have to act.
I had two experiences that really, when I was younger, that really drove that message. One of them was my father. He felt more comfortable in prison. And that just taught me that it's what you surround yourself with. that's going to give you your normal. So be cautious of what you decide.
Yeah.
And the other one was, I was married to my first husband, and there was these 4 women sitting across us having lunch. Long story short, somebody came up to their table and asked about their parent. Now, these women were in their 40s and 50s. So their parents were pretty old. Their dad had got up at Thanksgiving and walked out on the family.
Oh, God.
And in my heart, it broke me to know that that man waited 65 years to make himself happy.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to be that person.
Yeah. I think, yeah,
So,
that whatever, if there's a word, I don't know it, but if there's like a projected regret, do you know what I mean?
yes.
If that can be a motivator for you, then awesome. Because I do think that a lot of people, especially pre-internet days, a lot of people ignored that feeling.
Yes.
Now though,
you just felt like everyone else ignored it, so you should too.
Yep. And that, I mean, to be honest, even if you don't have the social media of any individual in your life, you will make that assumption about them. Unless they are having a really pretty deep conversation about their life dreams and goals with you, you will have that expectation about everybody. But having social media, as much as I dislike it, I do see how it can be inspirational. And that's, I think,
it's a balance, just like everything else in life.
Every single damn thing in life is a balance. You're so right. And that, I think, is very well illustrated by the natal chart, especially because each of the axes have something to do with whatever's on the other side of it. You know, you can't have the Capricorn growth and ascension without the secure, deep root system of your ancestors. And I don't mean like in a hippy dippy woo woo ancestor's blessing necessarily, but if you don't have a strong home foundation, you will never have a successful business life. And people might think that they do because they are excelling at work or they're getting promotions or something. But because you are not happy at home and you are being a workaholic doesn't mean you're successful.
Yep. And I guess it also comes down to, what do you equate success with?
Sure, that's fair. That's such a good point, especially with someone who has the North Node in Cancer. Business comes naturally to you, and I didn't mention that earlier, but that's a normal thing with having the South Node in Cancer. People who were born in 1982 were given that blessing, and you know there's downsides to it too, depending on especially what area of your chart it's in. But you know, having success in, for you specifically, being a leader and your relationship to leadership, but also leading your children is paramount. And I didn't mention that necessarily, but I bet you there's quite a few people, and my generation especially now, because we've got Cancer Chiron, we're afraid to have children, so we just don't. And
that makes complete sense.
Yeah, that's something that I've had to come to terms with. Like, the choice for my husband and I not to have children was partially because he already had a 9-year-old when we met. And so I'm not saying that I don't have any youthful people in my life that I look at. You know, I've got lots of nephews and nieces. I'm not saying I don't have any nurturing relationships at all. But the real reason that I didn't have kids is really because I didn't want to have to take care of someone, because I wanted to be taken care of. And I had to face that, you know? And so anyways, I guess for someone like you and for the people that were born around your same time frame, is you were given that blessing of having an easier time in business. It doesn't mean that, you know, it's a walk in the park, but you have a natural talent for it. So I hope that makes you feel like you are maybe on the right track, you know, with having your own business.
I hope so, because this has been a very, it's been a rough road. I've encountered a lot of, are you kidding me? Moments.
Yeah. I can appreciate
But that's the problem, that I encounter these "are you kidding me" moments, and within a day or two, I have a blessing show up that tells me continue on.
Yep. You mentioned that when we first met. Yeah.
Crazy bipolar person.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that is probably a lot to do with the Cancer, because Cancer is always growing and shedding and growing and shedding, right? It's not a long-term thing. It's a short-term turnaround. In every month you will have growth and decline and growth and decline. And that's true for everyone in somewhere in their chart, but it's way stronger for someone with placements in Cancer. And to me, it's way stronger with someone who has the North Node in Cancer, because the current of life is constantly pushing you towards change and newness and nurturing and creativity and creation and intuition. And it can just be so frustrating because your natural talents are around logic.
Yes, it's exhausting.
Yeah, I have Mars in Cancer, so I resonate with that exhaustion. Yeah, it's frustrating to feel like, okay, well, I have this information, now how do I act with it? It's just the mailbox saying I make the choice, right? It can be really easy to get lost in the Cancer waxing and waning and just be like, well, I guess I'll just be lazy because I feel like it. And that's a really hard thing with Mars and Cancer, is it's like, well, I don't feel any actual pressure. There's no actual deadline. So I guess I just won't. And that is part.
And isn't that crazy though? Because I will tell you, that's kind of how this business started. As in, the opportunities that I was given along the way were in some way not pressured. But I still had to work what I felt like 4 times harder. Even though there was no pressure.
Well, you probably felt, I hate to say this, but you probably felt like it was a lot harder because there was no pressure. Because I bet you're really good under pressure. Like you perform.
I don't know.
Well.
I've always been under pressure.
Yeah. Well, you were born in a crucible. That makes sense, of course. But yeah, I think that's a really notable Cancer thing. And it sucks because other people don't see that because it's hidden from them. They see your Leo rising, your Taurus, 10th house, and they don't see your truth. That's why your friend felt like it was not necessarily a full experience of Sara.
Yes. And I have a lot of people tell me, especially back in the day, oh, you're how did they put it? Like, I'm a princess.
Okay, yeah.
Like, you're taken care of, always.
Yeah, I can see that because that's a pretty common Leo rising experience. People think that Leo risings, even if they don't know they're Leo rising, like that's just the experience of somebody who has Leo rising, because Leo is the ruler. It's the prince, it's the princess, it's the king, the queen, it's the royalty. But see, something notable about your chart is your lack of fire, except in your relationships to who you are as a person and who people think you are at a professional level. People who know you better know that's not really the case. But it's funny because the same thing happens to people with any rising sign, but then a lack of that in the rest of the chart. So like for someone like me, I have Capricorn rising, but the things that are in Capricorn aren't very helpful to my personality. It's like Neptune and Uranus and the node. So it's like people meet me and they do assume that I'm very serious and smart and intelligent. And I'm not saying I'm not smart and intelligent and serious, because that's a real a component of my personality. But because I don't really have, like I have my sun in Taurus, but people don't meet your sun. It's not something that they really get from me. Like maybe you eat my cooking and you're like, oh yeah, you're a good cook. Well, yeah, I'm a Taurus. But it's not that clear and visible, because It's not that prominent in my chart. My Mercury is in Aries. So people, when they get to know me, they're like, oh, she's firecracker. She's not calm and serious. She's a wild child, you know? So the same thing happens in your chart. People meet you and they think, oh, warm, gregarious, a go-getter, excitable and fun and whatever. But you have a lot, like you are trying to balance the emotional truth of your experience with the intellectual logic that is discordant with that, and also discordant with the fire.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a hot dumpster fire.
Everybody's life is. Don't feel like you're alone in that. That's the beauty, though. I hope that it's clear that that's the beauty for everyone listening, that you get to understand, like, okay, people are going to at first meet me and think this. It doesn't mean that once they meet the real me, that it's wrong and I'm not likable, because that happens to so many people, me included. That's one of the reasons that I actually started practicing astrology publicly instead of just reading about it on my own and not telling anybody about it, because I fell through that same problem. Everybody with abandonment wounds needs to know that it is not that you are wrong and that anybody can say that, but it is expressly described in your chart what you are more likely to be, how am I trying to say this? What you are more likely aligned to versus what you portray. And it doesn't mean either one is wrong.
Exactly. That is the important part.
I think too, once you recognize that, it's easier to meet new people and give them a heads up. Like, I don't think you need to be apologetic whatsoever about your personality, but now I am a little more upfront with people, especially if I meet someone at work or something like that. I let them know, like, yeah, at work, I'm pretty, because I have Libra rising, or Libra in the 10th house. So at work, I'm pretty calm and, you know, diplomatic, and I stay in my lane mostly because I don't really want to get involved one-on-one with any of these individuals, because it's a commitment to me. And so I don't want that. So now if I'm going to move forward in a relationship with someone at work, I will know, and I'm married, so I don't mean like physically or anything.
Yeah.
But if I was going to move forward with a friendship with someone there, I'm upfront and I'm like, yeah, when I'm not here, I'm loud and excitable. And if I'm shouting, it's because I'm excited, not because I'm angry. And so I slip that into conversation so that way I can prepare them, which is not something people who don't have astrology get to do.
Exactly. And I always tell people, I said, you will hear about my closet and you will know it's important. And if you ever get a whiff that I'm in my closet, just know I'll come out a different person to let me be.
Yeah, right. God, that's such a Cancer sun thing to say. That's great.
And it's like, just let me be for a bit. Right. And after I have processed my emotions, I'll come and look for you.
Yeah. One of the things I think that I always come away with conversations with people I don't know well, especially in this context, one of the things I always come away with is this inner knowing that, and Pam, in this book that I referenced earlier, Pam Gregory phrases it really, really impressively, I think, where she talks about, and this isn't a new concept, but she talks about how every other animal and plant on the planet has a seed of whatever kind, and it expands itself into what it's meant to be. An acorn does not decide if it wants to be an oak or a cherry tree. You know what I'm saying? A baby chick does not decide, do I want to be the swan, the turkey, or the duck? Or the chicken, right? Yes. Anything that is already set in motion is going to expand into what it is meant to be. And I'm not saying that in your actions have no consequences and you have no free will kind of fashion, because that's not what I mean. Pam describes it well. The music is going to play. Are you going to play it well, or are you going to play it discordantly? And so that's been kind of something I've been mulling over recently, is how do I reduce friction in my expression? Because I'm going to unfold. in whatever way I'm meant to, but how can I reduce the friction in order to facilitate that process? And process is unfolding is like, you know, my trademark thing. Process is unfolding TM, but.
And I think the important part, and it's something that as a society we have let go of, is listening to our intuition. Because it feels, you get the panic for a reason.
Yes.
It's trying to tell you something.
Yeah, the mailbox's flag is raising. That's what that
is. And it's, you can drive by it and ignore it.
Mm-hmm. The letter's still in the box. But the mail
is waiting for you.
Yep, the letter's in the box. Yeah, I call that ostriching, where you stick your head in the sand and you don't deal with something. I am notorious for doing that in my financial life.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, gosh, let's just wrap up a little bit. I just want to check in. What would you like to kind of finish up with? Are we feeling good? Is there anything that's a stone that's left unturned? Do we need to visit anything, or how are we feeling?
No, I feel great. I really appreciate the focus we did on Jupiter, because me and Jupiter have had issues since I was introduced to astrology.
Sure.
It was a fight.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like my Jupiter was actually seen.
Well, good. And without going down another long rabbit hole, I think something that maybe is missed when you or someone in your position would look at I don't want to say arbitrary, but even things that are semi-targeted, like the Astro short click forecast. I love that. And I'm not saying it's a bad resource. I think everybody should go in and read every single thing that Astro offers on their click portrait. And if anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about, I can leave a link down below for you to get yours. But I think something that's missing in most of that for your experience is probably how important your children are. And we didn't talk about them very much, but children's lives should be private. And I don't personally think that they should be meddled with. They should just be guided. But you, especially with the 0-degree Cancer Mercury, the Cancer Sun, the true node in the Cancer sign, regardless of it being in the 12th house, I don't care what rising sign you had. That is still the mark of someone who they need to lean into nurturing, whether it's an actual child or a business or animals or something. Nurturing is a very important thing. And because it is the strongest aspect in your chart, Mercury in Cancer trine Jupiter in the 4th house specifically, there is something so clear to me that, and this is so overused these days, but that whole thing about generational curse breakers or whatever the fuck it's called, it's, this trauma stoppage that we're really focused on. I did mention this a lot for anybody who's interested in that. I mentioned that a lot in the last episode with Tiffany, where we talked a lot about your generation is the first one that starts to give us more agency around our issues. Okay. Like the millennial generation is known for that. A lot of people call us snowflakes, but it's because we are so willing to go deep into our trauma and our fear and our frustration, and it's leading to less children for sure. I understand that blah blah blah, society, birth rate declining, whatever. But we are the first generation, you guys included, of having those big planets going through Scorpio. So it starts with your generation where you get Jupiter in Scorpio, and then it goes to Saturn entering into Scorpio, which is an even deeper layer of digging into that Scorpio depth of emotion and intuition and knowing that what we're doing is right for us and for the future. I don't care about what the boomers want. I don't care about what Gen X is doing, and you're technically part of Gen X slightly. I get that, but you're part of the transition into the millennial generation because of that strength and willingness to dig into your shadow. And that's overused too, but you get it, I'm sure.
I do. And I feel like that Uranus comes into play because I have, and to keep my kids anonymous,
Yeah.
my kids' age range from 25 to 3.
Yeah, you have a big swath of data there. That's interesting for generations. Yeah. And I think you're right, because Uranus entering into Sagittarius after having been in Scorpio just made it very unpredictable for people before you. You know what I mean? Like, imagine having that unpredictability in the deepest, most uncomfortable part of the chart. Right. And for you, it's double because it's in your 4th house, which is the darkest, deepest part of the chart, the most private part. But still, even if they had a different rising sign, having Uranus in Scorpio is going to give them very much an unpredictable nature around whatever it is that's causing them fear and trauma and scarcity. And then after that, after your generation comes my generation, where we've got Pluto in Scorpio, which is even deeper. It's the deepest layer. Maybe you could say Chiron, just depending on whatever context, but that's the deepest layer of excavation of all of that nasty rot and grit.
But look at all the healing that's happening because of it.
Yes, exactly. And that's why
we needed that. We were desperate.
Yes. And there was someone on a Facebook group, I won't say her name, but there was someone who was kind of complaining / judging about how snowflakey the millennial generation can be and how they think that they have the best Pluto placement. Well, there's a reason that Pluto only goes for 15 years through Scorpio. It's because it's awful. That's why. So, and I'm not saying that Pluto anywhere is easy. It's not. That's not its purpose. It's never meant to be easy. But I just wanted to make a point. I just wanted to make a point that we have your generation and you specifically, not as an individual, but like people born around the same time as you, have that Jupiter on the 0 degree. And Jupiter had retrograded. I believe it was, I know it was further along in the sign earlier because Tiffany was born in January, but it did retrograde. So it's slightly before you guys really kicked it off. And the fact that you got to have a good business sense with the South Node in Capricorn and having the nurturing capabilities that you got because of your Sun and Mercury and True Node, that to me says that you are a really great person to be a leader in that. And I know leadership is something that is going to be hard for you, but important based on the square to Saturn and Mars and it being in the 12th house near the node. Leadership is a hard thing for you, but don't discount how much it matters that you are leading your children through their lives. And that's important for every parent, but I just can't really express how much more important it is for your kids because you've got that 0 degree Scorpio in the house or Jupiter in Scorpio that you are building yourself and the bridge from where you came from.
And hence I told my husband the other day, I said, my children are going to kill me. One keeps me up until 11. And then another calls me with marriage problems at 11:30.
Oh, geez.
Doesn't get off the phone until 4. For my other kid to get up at 4:30.
Oh, yeah.
Ready for the day.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And you know what? It's funny because I know that those are the kinds of things that they will look back on, and not your little ones getting up early. I know. Yeah. But those are the kind of things that are written into your soul contract as the the frustration, sure, fine, but the healing ointment for what you never got when you were a kid, I'm sure.
Exactly. And that's why my kids know it doesn't matter what time you call me. Mm-hmm. I'm going to pick up. Mm-hmm. But man, will I need my closet after.
Yeah, no kidding. I totally appreciate that. Well, gosh, it has been such a good chat. I'm sorry I took up so much of your time, but it was necessary, I think.
No worries. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, keep us updated with whatever's going on, because I do think Mercury, being retrograde in your 9th house associated with the MC is going to give you some of that, like, oh, maybe I need to look back. Am I doing the right things, especially with you know, your business and things like that. And then with the eclipses and everything, I'm just interested in what's happening for everyone. So I want to extend that offer to anybody who's listening to, you know, let us know in the comments. What do you think is going on? I personally have some exciting things that might be going on for me, but I don't want to jinx it. So if you are not afraid to jinx whatever's going on in your life, then leave it in the comments, because we all want to snoop. Anywho, it's been so great. I would love for you to leave any feedback that you have, everybody, I mean, because this is a new format. So let me know what feedback you have, and if you need anything, I'll be here for you. But that was my second episode. How'd we do?
Congratulations. Amazing.
Hey, thank you. Good. I'm glad it was good. But yeah, okay. So everybody have a great day, and I will chat with you later.